From here to the stars, I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Cathy Smith, who has recently been elected to the board of directors of the IRG. She has a master's degree from the University of Tennessee, and her background is in molecular biology, entomology, and agronomy. My guest today is Cathy Smith. Her background is in molecular biology, entomology, and agronomy. She has recently been elected to the board of directors of the IRG, so it seemed an appropriate time to get a sense of her vision for the future of interstellar space exploration. Cathy, what goals of the IRG do you feel are sufficiently important that you not only joined the IRG as a member, but offered to join its board of directors?
What I've always liked about the IRG is that they are not afraid to address practical issues in this. We want humanity to live in space or live in an extraterrestrial environment. What are the practical considerations that we need to think about? Not just how do we get there, how do we prepare humans for a long space flight, but how do we feed them? How do we make sure they stay healthy? What sort of considerations do we have to think about when we start getting interstellar transit and commerce, when we've got populations that are going to be separated for long periods of time, but will eventually come back and join with larger populations of humans? You know, what are the disease considerations? How do we keep people fed and healthy? What sort of considerations do we need to think about in regards to fertility? Right now, we don't know that humans are going to have an easy time of it with population growth in 0G or on other planets. We've made those assumptions that we'll have a workaround or we'll figure something out, but that's a pretty big assumption. So I have always liked the fact that IRG in their conferences, in their symposia, have never been afraid to ask, well, are we sure? And have we thought about this? And if we haven't, what are some of the questions that we need to start thinking about? And what are some of the directions that we need to start looking in to take this into account?
How big a part do you believe that our building up a space infrastructure within our solar system will play in our launching of interstellar missions? And this could be in Earth orbit or lunar orbit or even out among the asteroids.
Oh, I think building up a space infrastructure is really going to play a big part. It's a stepping stone. It's that first, can we do this? And then we can have people out there longer term so that we can see how feasible it is. What are the hardships that the human body is going to face and the human psyche are going to face in that environment long term? Profitability, how well is this working? What are the benefits to humanity? But it also acts to inspire. Every single group of humans on this planet have had people who are like, what's next? What's over the next hill? What's on the other side of the river? And I think having the space infrastructure, even on Earth or Mars, suborbital, just getting us out there, that's that first step to then having that next group of people go, yeah, but what's over there? And expanding us out. And, it's hokey to say, but it is the final frontier, or at least the next frontier. And I think as a species, having that frontier inspires us, keeps us going. What's over that hill? What's beyond the next star?
Well, that plays into my next question. What is it that makes you feel hopeful about the future of interstellar exploration, and what worries you?
Again, I really feel hopeful because it's something that can inspire people. It's something that it allows us to focus on something else besides our interpersonal issues. It's a goal that is larger than us, and people getting out there and being able to see the Earth for the beautiful jewel that it is in space, and then being able to go further and do other things. That's incredibly inspiring. My concerns are, of course, that, you know, humans are very competitive. And so there's going to be a lot of, well, you know, our country's in space, why isn't yours? Or, hey, our country's in space, we've got the high ground, so now we can use that to our advantage. And also coming into play is, again, long-term effects on how is this going to affect us physically, how is this going to affect us reproductively, and how is this going to affect us mentally? We have some evidence from the International Space Station. We have some evidence from some of the other space flight that can give us an idea about long-term physical and mental implications. But if we're looking to have longer-term populations in space, we really need to start looking at, is this feasible on a reproductive level? Because it happens in long ship journeys. It happens in, it used to happen in long caravan journeys. If you've got a mixed crew, a pregnancy could happen. And I don't know how much research has been done in pregnancies in space. I think there may have been something done with rats, but I'm not certain.
Okay, interesting idea. I hadn't even thought to ask about that. Yeah. Generally, when talking about the topic of interstellar space exploration, we focus on the difficulties, the hurdles, the obstacles, but I want to take a moment to discuss the benefits. I've made a list of 4. Maybe you can add to it. I'd like your thoughts on each one. For example, the first one in my little bitty list is expansion of human knowledge by overcoming the obstacles that stand in our way. If you would talk about that one.
Oh, well, I mean, even our earliest efforts at space exploration have gone a long way to creating new materials and new methodologies that have benefited us on Earth. Ultralight aluminum, increase like air filters and carbon scrubbing. I mean, and these are very basic things. And I think moving forward, we're going to find that, okay, so we have to adapt this. How do we do hydroponics in zero G? And not just small scale. We've got a wall, and that allows our astronauts to have a salad on occasion. We've got a bay, and we want to grow fresh food for our crew, because while we do have MREs or the equivalent of a packaged meal, fresh food, vegetables, fruits, things like this are a huge morale booster. So I think, and if we can learn how to refine some of these hydroponics in difficult situations, that might help efforts on Earth to increase agricultural production or agricultural sustainability. And in a number of places, that's becoming increasingly important.
Okay. My second benefit is expansion of human knowledge in what we discover once we are there at this other solar system. If you would talk about that.
Oh, yes. So again, it's that right now we are dependent on the probes and the satellites and the robots, the rovers that we send out for images and data on space. And they're really neat, and they're really complicated and really sophisticated, but it comes back to the same thing. It's one thing to watch something on television. It's another thing to see it for yourself. And, you know, these satellite images, these robots, they're limited by the machine. And so we can look at them, and after they've gone through all of these computer filtering processes, and we can say, okay, we think this is what this looks like. But it's another thing entirely to be able to go and see it for yourself and say, okay, so on the computer image or on these images that we're being sent back, it looks like this. In reality, it looks more like this. And I mean, a recent example of that would be, what is it? The Chinese Mars rover, Tianyi, who took an image of what looked like a shack on Mars.
I hadn't heard that story.
Recently the Chinese rover on Mars took an image, it took a photo, and it looked like a little outhouse shack on Mars.
Okay.
And everyone was like, oh, what is this? What is this? And they went back and they're like, so we think it's a rock. We're pretty sure it's a rock. And that's what I'm getting into. It's one thing to look at this and say, oh, it looks like a shack. And then, no, it's a rock. It's a square-shaped rock.
I can think of another example. The American rover on Mars, its drill apparently got clogged with some junk. It was supposed to get samples from the soil, drill through rocks. And if it was a manned mission, then somebody could go out there and fix it.
Yep, just give it a couple taps, fix it, get it back. Yeah.
So you have the ability to improvise if you have people that are there.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. My third item is benefit. Third benefit is discovery and study of alien life forms and their evolutionary trees, and presumably comparing them to our own. I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
I do. It's really exciting. So it's long been hypothesized that so on Earth, you have one of the kingdoms of life that's called archaea. And as the name suggests, these are very ancient organisms. These days, many of them are found they're considered extremophiles. They're found around volcanic vents. They're found at the top of mountains in thin oxygen. They're found growing on glaciers or Antarctica. They are thought to be some of the oldest still living organisms on Earth. And they first came around when Earth was a much less hospitable place. Some of these organisms have even been shot into space and were on a panel outside the International Space Station. They were sent up by the European Space Agency to see if they could survive low Earth orbit. And many of them did. They didn't necessarily thrive, but they survived. I think it's going to be really, really interesting when we start getting into Mars, and if we have the ability to look at under the Mars ice caps and see if maybe the hypothesis is correct that there might be some traces of these archaea still on Mars, still hanging out in this wasteland, at least from an Earth perspective, of a planet just hanging out and continuing to exist in these very extreme conditions. And that, to me, that's just fascinating to see if that's a possibility.
Okay. And my fourth benefit is eliminating the possibility of human extinction by living on more than one world.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, meteorites are Mother Nature's way of saying, how's that space program going?
Yeah.
It's yes. I think from a species survival point, with all of the things that we know now that are in space and some of the meteorites that have been near misses, or even the past evidence of meteorites that have hit Earth, leaving these massive craters, causing some previous extinction events. Yeah, I think as a species, we need to hedge our bets and start getting occupation on other planets, other environments. If we really care about our long-term survival, we need to diversify.
If Just a few days ago, I watched a movie called Don't Look Up, in which the Earth is destroyed by an incoming comet about the size of the dinosaur killer that took out the dinosaurs. I don't know. That may be a spoiler for people watching this video. I don't know if they have not seen the movie. It was a very bizarre, it was a satirical movie, kind of like Dr. Strangelove, that kind
right.
of. Yeah, it was actually pretty good though. But,
I've had it recommended. I haven't gotten around to watching it yet.
Yeah, definitely watch it, but it's very strange.
Okay.
Anyway, let's see. We move on to the next question. Do you think it will be possible for genetic data to be reduced into digital memory for the trip to another star system and then turned back into chemical molecules and grown into living things after we reach our destination?
It's an interesting idea. And I could see a couple of ways that might make it work, but I don't know that anything has been proven yet. So it would be the equivalent of a 3D printer. So you would have this computer data, these computer files, and it would be, you'd have to have the data for like the double-stranded DNA, and then you could feed that into a 3D printer to create this DNA molecule. But even then, you've got to worry about, okay, so we've got this DNA, now we have to get it into a nucleus in a cell and give it a zap to start going.
In other words, having the data in a molecule, a DNA molecule, isn't enough. You have to have a cell, a living cell to put it in.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, at work all the time. I mean, I isolate DNA, and there's experiments that you can do it in your kitchen using strawberry DNA, and what you get is just kind of a long, slimy rope of DNA protein. And that's interesting, and it's a lot of information right there, but it needs to be in a cell, and it needs to start working. And the cell needs to be able to say, okay, so this is DNA, and here are our promoters, and here are our genes, and we need to keep going. And then that cell needs to be able to replicate, and you need to be able to go from this inert DNA into cells that are dividing and diversifying, differentiating.
Yeah, years ago, I stumbled across the fact that it wasn't really taught in biology when I studied it. It wasn't that it was not known, but it was that they didn't really push it. And that is, they referred to the DNA as the blueprint of the human body. It's your, you know, how to make a human being. But it doesn't include any data on how to make a cell. The cell has to already exist. And so when human beings reproduce, sperm comes together with an egg and form an existing cell. The egg provides the cell. So the DNA doesn't actually make a cell at any point. It simply uses a cell that already existed. And the cell line went all the way back to basically the beginning of life on Earth. And anyway, that's just an interesting side note to me.
Well, you know, DNA is fragile, can be adversely affected and destroyed by ultraviolet light. So the cell, the nucleus, the cell membrane, all of these things were initially thought to have been developed both as a way for replication of the DNA, but also as protection of the DNA. It gets really kind of weird when you start thinking, wait, am I doing these things, or is this a long line of my DNA just trying to be self-preservation and protect itself?
What was that? There was a book, The Selfish Gene, came out a number of years ago. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Let's see, my next question. Today on Earth, genetic material is often stored in the form of tiny samples at cryogenic temperatures. If we are carrying genetic material to another solar system in this form, how much diversity of species might be carried in a few hundred kilograms of cargo? And speaking of which, this is really a second question hidden inside the other. How many cows, for example, are needed to create a viable breeding stock, or chickens, or geese, or sheep? And could this number be stored in a small cryogenic unit?
So I can't speak to specific numbers on this, but I mean, when you say chickens, let's not forget that the domesticated chicken is comprised of hundreds of breeds. So if you want genetic diversity, you have to ask yourself, do I want genetic diversity in terms of Rhode Island Reds, or do I want genetic diversity in terms of the entire domesticated chicken species? Because if you're just willing to say, hey, look, I don't care about Rhode Island Reds as a breed, I just want chickens.
All I want is scrambled eggs.
All I want is scrambled eggs. Then
I love scrambled eggs.
An easy way to get diversity would be to say, we're just going to take chickens from all of these different breeds. We're going to toss in a couple of wild stock chickens, which I believe are jungle fowl, and we're going to call it good. And that would be a way of getting diversity. Now, the downside is that a lot of these breeds were developed on Earth for specific uses. You've got layers, you've got meat, you've got your roasters, you've got the breeds of chickens for fighting, if that's still a thing where some people are. So if you're saying, well, I just want all of these chickens here, you're going to have some sorting issues down the road when you're like, okay, so we crossed a breeder with we crossed an egg laying chicken with a roasting chicken, and now they just kind of waddle around the farmyard and they don't lay that great. On the other hand, you're still going to have eggs and you're still going to have chickens. So again, the question comes in: are you concerned only about the chicken as an animal, or are you concerned about, okay, so we have these agriculturally useful breeds and we want to preserve these breeds and these breed stocks and these lineages? So if you only want the chicken, you can get away with fewer total animals and still maintain a wide diversity. If you're worried about conserving those breeds, you need more animals and you need to do diversity ahead of time. But in terms of numbers of animals for any single species to maintain diversity, I don't know. And I'm not certain that we do know. There have been estimates. I want to say I've read numbers like 250,000 for humans from a diverse and broad starting population. But on the other hand, there are instances where with careful genealogical tracings, you can have a group of people exist and procreate for dozens of generations. It just takes careful tracking of who's marrying who and whose kids are whose kids to maintain health and make sure that you aren't marrying too close of a cousin.
Okay. Let's see. How well protected, and this is a bit of a technical question, maybe a little bit out of your reach, but how well protected must genetic samples be during long interstellar trips from background radiation and from radiation produced by the forward motion of the spacecraft?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know in the lab, when we're concerned about trace bits of DNA or enzymes in our PCR hoods, we have the ultraviolet light shine on them for 20 minutes, and that usually takes care of it. So it is fragile. You will get some protection to the DNA because usually your cryogenic tanks are metal. and they're a double wall metal with an air gap in between to help for insulation. But I don't know that anyone knows right now how much protection you would need.
Okay. On TV and in movies, people traveling between stars are often depicted in some kind of extended sleep state, which slows their metabolism. Sometimes it's cryonic, sometimes they appear to be at room temperature. Do you know of any research at all that supports these fictional methods of overcoming the huge travel times? And if not, what is your opinion of the probability of something being developed eventually?
I'm familiar with the concept. I know they've been trying to see how it works in mice or how it works in other hibernating animals, and could this be somehow induced in humans? I'm not aware of how much research has been done with it. I haven't heard of any breakthroughs. I would love for that to happen, because, go to bed on Earth and wake up on Mars or something like this. That would be great. But, also too, that, I guess the difference is between hibernation and suspended animation. Hibernation would just be sleep, time would still be passing. Suspended animation, no time passes. You would wake up in the same age or close to it as what you went to sleep. Suspended animation, I have not heard anything. I mean, I think right now the most complicated organism that can do that is a tardigrade, a water bear. And there's a lot of steps between a tardigrade and a human.
Okay.
To cope with the long travel times, it may be that we have generational ships. I mean, using current technology levels, everything I'm saying can go completely out the window if we start getting some scientific breakthroughs in this. But right now, you're looking at generational ships.
Okay. That was Cathy Smith. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series created by the Interstellar Research Group. The IRG is a nonprofit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. Find us online at irg.space. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Interstellar Research Group, I thank you.